All right, everybody, really excited about today's guest. Got a chance to sit down with her a few weeks ago, and talk to her about the topic at hand, and just overall an awesome person to get to know. So really excited to introduce to you fine folks of Wisconsin, Senator Johnson. Senator Johnson, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fine.
That's good. You guys got a little rain down there too? I always talk about the weather. They make fun of me, so we got to talk weather quick.
We did. We did get our fair share of rain. It was raining coming up, and so yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the rain, especially having to drive in it.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, hopefully we got clear blue skies the rest of the week, and we'll have an awesome little interview here or sit down. And really appreciate you taking the time to talk to the people of Wisconsin. I know they got it's interesting times. But before we kind of get started, if you could just give us a little background on yourself and how you kind of got started in politics, I always kind of like to just ask people that.
Sure. Well, I'm State Senator LaTonya Johnson. I represent the 6th Senate District, which is Milwaukee's north and west sides. I also have parts of Wauwatosa. I was elected to the Senate in 2016. Prior to that, I did 2 terms in the State Assembly, officially being sworn in 2013 in the State Assembly. So this is my second term in the State Senate. Prior to that, I owned my own child care center 24 hours, 7 days a week out of my home. And I was president of the child care union. I helped to start the first child care union for the state of Wisconsin. And I was president of that union, Local 502, Wisconsin Child Care Providers Together. And I helped to care for some of the state's poorest kids. And what I noticed was no matter how hard my parents worked, and some of them worked multiple jobs, and some of my kids were in my daycare center for 10 hours plus a day. My parents just seemed to never be able to get ahead. They always qualified for subsidies, Wisconsin shares in terms of child care subsidies, in terms of Medicaid. And just more needed to be done. You always hear people talk about the middle class, but you very seldomly hear people talk about those individuals who wanted to just be in the middle class. So I thought if things were going to change, it needed to have people in the state legislature that had all types of life experiences, and that included life experiences that reflected those individuals who pretty much mimicked poverty. So I decided to run for office. I went through an organization called Emerge Wisconsin, and they trained Democratic women how to run for office and win. And that was the start of my venture into politics. And that was pretty much how I got here.
That's awesome. That's a neat story. That's always just my hope, anyways. Or like I just feel a little extra, like passion or consideration for folks who get into politics who see the struggles firsthand. I feel like that's essentially how I got to be where I am with cannabis. Just seeing how positively it affected some people. Obviously there was me, and just helps me with littler issues, but seeing some people really struggle, and then their fear in buying product, and if they get caught, and it sparks that. Like I feel like some of us are just kind of wired that way. Like we could keep doing our own thing, but at the same time, when you see something hands-on that often, it's like, okay, somebody's got to do something. So kudos to you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if you I got a chance to get a few questions together with the community, so I sent those over to you. I will read through those, and again, appreciate your time with us and just sharing a little insight on things that are going on from your side of the table at the Capitol. So, progress on legislation. Could you update us on the current status of cannabis legalization efforts in Wisconsin? And do you know of any steps that are being taken at the state level to push forward?
And so I did make sure that I wrote out my answers, so I wouldn't miss anything. So prior to me being elected in 2012, there were proposals to make sure that we legalize medical marijuana here in Wisconsin. And the conversation basically centered around full legalization, that conversation wrapped up somewhere around 2014, when now Senator Agard took on that legislation and basically just went full-fledged ahead with trying to make sure that legalization was at the forefront of her bill proposal. Since then, we have seen more and more public input and more people joining the push to legalize marijuana, and rightfully so, especially for communities in our Black and Brown communities too. First of all, it just makes it more safe for everyone, especially my brother died of a drug overdose. It'll be 3 years in August. And his first introduction into drugs was through marijuana. But we all know that drugs are not all the same. Things are being laced. And we want to make sure that when people are buying drugs off the street, that drugs are as safe as possible. And the only way to do that is to make sure that people can do that safely through a dispensary. And so making sure that things are safe and that they're legal is of utmost importance. So Governor Evers proposed in the state budget to legalize marijuana. And unfortunately, that was pulled out by my Republican colleagues in joint finance. But we all know the financial benefits of legalizing marijuana and what that could do for our state's economy in bringing in those additional resources and how that could be spent. So far, the conversation has been centered around legalizing marijuana in terms of medical marijuana, but even that has had its controversy on how that will be ran. We have some individuals who want it to be state ran. And we have other individuals who want it to be a private industry and have it open to privately run organizations for medical marijuana. But so far, we haven't did what we needed to do to be able to legalize it yet.
Nope, I hear you, and that's really what we're trying to do is kind of get that voice to the people who are kind of slow to the. And I really think it comes down to a lack of education,
Mhm.
and a lack of some people's willingness to learn about the plant. That's obviously that could be a whole nother topic, but I'm glad that it's still in the, it seems to be a little more talked about in like the news and that kind of stuff. So between that, the people who are already understanding of the benefits of cannabis, and then hopefully with the push on our end as the people, hopefully we can get this thing to the finish line. So appreciate you.
It just makes sense because when you are basically sandwiched in between the other states like, Minnesota and Illinois, where it's legalized on both sides, and then you have Wisconsin where it's not, where you're having people going to those other states to buy, and then they're having to worry about coming back into Wisconsin where it's illegal. It just doesn't make any sense when you can still catch cases for something that's legal, just over the border. And you kind of have to ask yourself why, especially when you have doctors who are writing prescriptions and they're able to go just across the border and have those prescriptions filled. It makes absolutely no sense.
Right. Frustrating is the word.
Yeah.
Frustrating. You touched on it just a little bit, but as far as the economic impact, how do you envision the legalization of cannabis impacting Wisconsin's economy? And are there any projections on job creation and tax revenue?
So what we see from projections is basically $165 million that it would bring into our state's economy. And that's $165 million annually. And that's not small change. And that's just a projection. And so basically it could be even more than that. What we do know is that when Colorado implemented legalization, they saw 18,000 jobs in terms of increases in jobs just from the industry alone. And so given that Wisconsin shares a pretty similar population, we anticipate to see around that amount of jobs growing from the industry as well too. And that will be in terms of agriculture, in terms of retail, in terms of security, and in terms of regulatory in the industry. So that would be huge. We're talking about $165 million that could be invested in our schools and healthcare and in so many other needs that we have here. That's money that could be freed up for other things. And that's money that we would gladly free up for other things. And that's extremely important because as you know, elected officials, our number one priority is to be good stewards over taxpayer dollars. And that's one way for us to do that is to make sure that we utilize every dollar possible and to make sure that it's spent in those places that we could get the biggest bang for the dollar.
Sure, giving back 100%. I
Mhm.
agree with you on that. That's awesome. When it comes to criminal justice reform, I know this is one of the biggest things that, again, it feels way overdue. But can you speak on how cannabis legalization might affect criminal justice reform in Wisconsin, particularly in terms of expunging past offenses?
So the expungement process is modeled after Minnesota. And so the state will review records and initiate the expungement process, removing the responsibility from the individual with the record to petition for the expungement. The bill requires the director of the state courts to review the records of acts that have been decriminalized under the bill. If a record is for the conviction or for an act that the bill decriminalizes or lessens the penalty for, the sentencing court must be notified. If that act was a misdemeanor, the court must dismiss the conviction and expunge the record. Or if the applicable redesigned, or if applicable, redesignated to a lesser crime. If the act was a felony, the court must determine if it was in the public interest to dismiss the conviction and the expungement of the record, or if applicable, redesignated to a lesser crime. So the presumption is that such actions are in the public interest unless there is a clear and convincing evidence that the actions would create a risk to public safety. And also, we also would be remiss to state that, you know, the first offense for possession of marijuana is always going to be a municipal ticket. And
Right.
that's first and foremost. But that second possession is a felony. And especially for Black and Brown individuals, that's huge. We all know how felonies affect communities of color. And I think that that's the piece that a lot of people miss. And that's also where a lot of the discrimination comes in too. For example, Madison, they have done an excellent job of making sure that both their police departments and their sheriff's departments are on the same level when it comes to decriminalizing marijuana. They have basically across the board said that, you know, we're going to decriminalize this. We're not going to prosecute any marijuana offenses. Basically, I think it's up to 28 grams.
Right.
But in a lot of other communities, that's not the case. Not every case is a municipal ticket after the second offense. And some municipal tickets can be as high as $500, where some municipal tickets can be as low as $1. And in some communities, it can be for every offense. For example, it can be for every piece of paraphernalia. So there are a lot of discriminations in terms of county by county based on what is actually charged and what people are actually seeing. So since those things are not the same across the board, it becomes unfair for everybody. And we want to make sentencing and the process as fair as possible, especially since people are having to deal with these records long term. And that's another reason that we should legalize it to make things as fair as possible.
100%. I agree with that, and it's definitely frustrating being that it's still frustrating if you're in one spot, but like if you're traveling, you could be going through so many different actual sets of laws for what you're doing that's perceived illegal. It really is infuriating that we can't get on the same page.
And
Um,
And we know in this building, that, buying marijuana off the street, buying any drug off the street is unsafe. That's
Right.
why, we have pushes. We are having Narcon vending machines. That's why we have test strips, and we're making these things free of charge. So we know that there is a huge overdose epidemic out there. We know that there are families who have lost multiple family members to overdoses, right? So
Right.
we know in this building that there is more that needs to be done. So legalizing marijuana should be the very least of our concerns. And that's one path to making, things safer, especially recreational drugs, safer for the people who use it. Marijuana is not, in my opinion, a drug of concern. Um, it shouldn't be, especially when we can make it safer for everybody.
Yes, yes, agreed. One question that sometimes the naysayers like to bring up a lot is public safety. One thing that I think we could both attest to is that just like anything, obviously you could get into you could use too much cannabis, or you could turn into somebody who doesn't want to have a job, or like, but there's just that stigma out there that really what I think it comes down to is advocating for, just like anything else, adult responsible use. When it comes to just with anything in life, if you use too much of it, there's consequences, but those are your consequences. But what measures are being proposed to ensure public safety and responsible consumption once cannabis is legalized?
Well, we know that that's one of the biggest fears, right? That people are concerned about the people who will abuse cannabis, right? Just like
Mhm.
people abuse alcohol, but you still had people serving alcohol at Chuck E. Cheese.
Right,
To me, that's a bad combination, and we've seen some fights at Chuck E. Cheese because of alcohol, right?
right, right,
Uh,
definitely.
you know, I used to tell when my daughter's 26 now, and we used to leave Chuck E. Cheese before 11 o'clock because I'm like, look, at 11 o'clock, Chuck E. Cheese turns into a nightclub because that's when the kids leave and the adults come out. But like anything, there will be protocols that are put in place to ensure that teenagers cannot use cannabis recreationally. There will be IDs that are put in place. They will not be able to go to the dispensary and freely and legally buy, just like they can't freely and legally buy alcohol or tobacco. So that will be put in place to make sure that public safety is, which we know will be a huge concern, but to make sure that the criminal justice system is in place and to make sure that our children, which are our most vulnerable, is protected from that. The government will stand behind that to make sure that we do have safeties in place to make sure that those children are protected.
Awesome. I think that's the right approach. It's well, I just had somebody again bring up well, if it gets legalized, then there's going to be more kids using it, and we don't want any kids using it. But it's a pretty simple: keep it where you keep your Tylenol, keep it where you keep your alcohol. Like
Mhm.
it's, and then the same with the packaging. It shouldn't look like it's made for kids. I think we can all agree on that. So,
Mhm.
again, education, education, education. Regulatory framework. What kind of regulatory framework are you advocating for in Wisconsin to manage the cultivation, distribution, and sale of cannabis? Have you gotten that far?
So, under the bill, marijuana would be taxed and regulated, much like alcohol, and would be regulated by both the Department of Revenue and by the Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection, which is also known as DECAP. The proposal would basically require the sale of marijuana for recreational use to be sold by a marijuana retailer, which would be holding a permit issued by the Department of Revenue. Individuals would need to be at least 21 years of age to purchase marijuana for recreational use. All sales of recreational marijuana to minors would be strictly prohibited, just like it would be prohibited for them to buy alcohol or tobacco. Also, the plan also provides a path for medical marijuana users to access the product without paying retail taxes, which is extremely important. And under the bill, both Wisconsin residents and non-residents can possess no more than 5 ounces of marijuana and 6 plants for personal use.
Okay. Those are some pretty solid numbers. And again, I think having the layout in place, like it just seems very very in depth, very well thought out as far as touching the different aspects of it. When we look at like the proposed, most recent proposed medical cannabis plan, what are your thoughts on? I'm assuming there's a few too many restrictions on that. As far as what are your thoughts on expanding medical cannabis provisions in Wisconsin to include more conditions and easier patient access?
Well, I believe that the medical care should be a discussion that's between the doctors and the patients, because the doctors are the experts and the patients actually know what they need. Um, I'm, of course, open to the discussion about expanding the medical access, but I think that it's best left up to the patient and the doctor as to. I think the best way to go is still full legalization for adults. That's always the best course. But there are benefits to having just the medical portion, especially for younger users, for those children that are under the age of 21 that will benefit from the use of medical marijuana. I have my best friend, her daughter suffers from seizures. Now she is 18 years old, but as a child, she would have benefited, and that wasn't available to her. And you have a lot of, I remember sitting in one of the hearings, and there was a mom. Her daughter died, I think it was about a year after the hearing or so. It may have not even been a full year. But one of the things that I remember from that hearing was that she told us that she used to sing to her daughter, "You are my sunshine, my little sunshine. Please don't take my sunshine away." And that was one of the hardest days for me. And even now thinking about that, I choke up because as a mom, the hardest thing that you can ever think about or imagine, whether that's imaginary or not, is something happening to your kid. And the feeling of hopelessness of wanting to help your child and not being able to, I can't even imagine. And knowing that there's something out there that may help and you can't participate in it, regardless of how small it is, especially if you know that there's the potential for your child to die, the ability to be able to try anything to give that child an opportunity to live or a longer amount of time. And I remembered reading in the Journal Sentinel after the child had died. And the first thing that I thought about was like, I couldn't remember the child's name, but I remembered, "Oh no, my little sunshine," and I couldn't imagine what that mom was going through.
Yeah, that'd be tough. And I've heard quite a few stories that have been shared with me about people, whether it's their parents who were, anti-cannabis because of how they were raised, but knowing themselves that cannabis could potentially help them and having this moral, like, I don't want to like slip him a gummy or whatever. And it's just like, and I just had a family friend who went through rounds of chemotherapy and is struggling to eat. But again, I think it has a lot to do with how they were raised, that old school cannabis is not good, even if people are telling you it is, and it's just sad that we can't try to. Again, it's worth a shot to try. I would think it's not. It's frustrating the how hard it is to get access to it still, especially when we're talking pain relief or any kind of relief for anyone who's struggling out there. So I think that that definitely keeps us in this fight. It's for people like that. So. And you had also kind of touched on community investments. How do you think that revenue generated from cannabis taxes could be used to reinvest in communities most affected by previous drug enforcement policies?
Well, I think that, this bill creates taxes for the privilege of producing and processing and distributing or selling marijuana in the state. And 60% of that revenue collected from the tax is deposited into a segregated fund. And the segregated fund is called the Community Reinvestment Fund. And I think that that's extremely important. What's so important about it is the segregation piece. So when something is segregated, that means that it can only be used for that purpose. That's extremely important, especially in this building, because if funds are not segregated, that means you can put funds into a certain pot. And if those funds are not segregated, they can be pilfered off and used for totally different purposes. But the fact that they are segregated, they can only be used for that purpose. And so for that community reinvestment fund, that means that under that bill, a person who may possess medical marijuana is not subject to sales or exercise taxes on the purchase or use of the marijuana. The bill provides for a number of grants to be paid from the revenue generated from the excess tax on the marijuana that is deposited into the Community Reinvestment Fund. And for example, the bill requires the Department of Administration to provide grants to the public, private and nonprofit entities in the state to promote diversity and advance equity and inclusion, including promoting inclusion of women and racial and ethnic minorities in the production and sales of marijuana. In addition, the bill directs the Department of Health Services to award grants to community organizations to implement community health and worker care models. And that's extremely important, especially for our minority communities, because we all know how bad the health disparities are. So this is a way to generate additional funds and to actually give back some of those funds in a way to help address some of those issues. In most cases in this building, a lot of those disparities continue to get worse because we don't adequately fund them in the first place, because we say we don't have the money, regardless of how much money we have. For example, in our rainy day fund, we currently have $1.8 billion. Every month, it collects $7.2 million in interest every month. But yet, when you ask about certain things being funded, the answer is we always don't have any money. During COVID, we spent not $1 in this state. The majority of our bills, the majority of anything that had to do with COVID related relief came from ARPA funds, ARPA dollars, federal funding. Now, if a global pandemic wasn't a state of emergency, then I don't know what was. When other states were struggling to keep afloat, we had a surplus. And the question is why? The answer is we didn't spend one damn dollar. And that says a lot. Because if we are continuously taking taxpayer money and creating these, rainy day funds that we're never using, even during rainy days, that are collecting mountains of interest, and we're having these huge surpluses that we're not spending money on. If every time, every budget cycle, schools are having to go to referendums because they're not having enough money to keep their schools afloat, which is taxing taxpayers not just once, but twice, there's an issue with how we're running this state. And that needs to be addressed. And so this bill alone would appropriate $125,000 in fiscal year 2023 and $250,000 in fiscal year 2025 for the Department of Transportation Drug Evaluation and Classification Program. The program provides training for law enforcement officers and others in the recognition of drug influence and impairment. So nobody would be more happy to see the legalization of marijuana than the Department of Revenue, because they would like the additional revenue.
Right.
Because they, of all people, know how that would benefit this state. and all of the good that could come from that.
Sure. And 7.2 million, that's crazy. And when you talk about that total amount of money, I was actually just reading an article that kind of explained, or that just helped you. I mean, it makes sense, but it's just I never really thought about it. But it was about when like government is holding money, and it's, or like how, or in this instance it was like rich people, like how they hold on to money, and how that really hurts the economy. Because if you or I spend $20 on a pizza and then leave a $5 tip, like there's money that otherwise wouldn't have been spent that's going to somebody to get a tip that they can then spend on something they otherwise. So like it really, it's like this repercussion that keeps getting spread out. So if it's just stacking up, it's almost like even more damaging, that it's not helping the economy because it's just sitting there. And like you said, if it's for a rainy day and you had a rainy day, that's interesting.
And even some of the money that came in through ARPA funds that was supposed to be spent, for our schools to deal with the mental health consequences of COVID, the lack of educational experiences because kids were being educated at home, that a lot of that money went to the general purpose fund where they could use to pay just ongoing expenses. So for example, we'll use the city of Milwaukee. Milwaukee was going to go bankrupt January 1st, 2025. The only reason that we didn't, that we were able to stave bankruptcy off that long was because of ARPA funds. And, Governor Evers gave us $398 million, and we used those ARPA funds to pay for essential services. By the time by the time shared revenue was passed and that increased sales tax, we were down to our last $96 million. So counties were hurting, and we were on our last leg. And if it wouldn't have been for those ARPA funds, you would have seen a lot of us go bankrupt.
That's crazy. Well, hopefully, or thankfully, that didn't happen. But the fact that it even got that close is kind of crazy.
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting. We pretty much already kind of tackled number 8, so let's move to question 9. Opposition concerns. What do you have any kind of a pulse on the main concerns of those opposed to cannabis legalization in Wisconsin, and how we could plan to address those concerns?
So many of my Republican colleagues have basically made their opposition around legalizing cannabis centered around the war on drugs. I have even heard them say that, oh yeah, Colorado, they're having so many problems since they've legalized, marijuana. They're having so many issues down there. I was like, well, I've been to Colorado a couple of times and I ain't seen no issues down there. It's just lack of education and them wanting to just maintain the status quo, right? We have had so many people flee Wisconsin. Literally, we've lost over 100,000 26-year-olds in the last 10 years, literally. I've lost 18,000 individuals from my district alone. I used to be the only state senator that represented just the city of Milwaukee. Now I represent the north side of Milwaukee, the west side of Milwaukee, and parts of Wauwatosa because I had to make up for the 18,000 people that I lost in my district. The same with District 4. So District 4 and District 6 are the predominantly African-American districts in the city of Milwaukee. I believe District 4 lost about 16,000 individuals. So the state of Wisconsin, instead of growing like a lot of other major cities, I think we added 17,000 people to our population. Now, here's the catch. During COVID, we saw growth in this state, but what they didn't know is if that growth came from kids moving back home because of COVID, or if that was actually a trajectory where the population was going up. And so these last, I believe it was 22 through 23, we saw 17,000 people roughly, right? 17,000 people for an entire state is not a lot when I've lost roughly about 18,000 people out of my one district alone. Yeah. So we are not seeing an uptick in population like other major cities or major states are. 17,000 people for a large state is not a lot. And so you have to ask why. And in my opinion, it's because of these policies. Wanting to keep the state the same as the status quo, you are running out, you are running off your child age bearing population. Your 26-year-olds are fleeing like flies. Your state is not growing because other states are becoming more attractive. They have better child care and support, family support policies, legalize marijuana, all the things that people are wanting to see to support, better lifestyles, to support increased incomes, not necessarily in Wisconsin. And so when you talk about oppositions, yeah, you're going to have your oppositions there, but what is it doing to grow the state? And you're seeing a lot of stagnation. And that's a huge concern for the people who are already here, right? Because if you are a young person coming out and you're given an opportunity to choose between staying here and going somewhere else for college and then returning back, what are your choices going to look like? And so people just need to get over their opposition, in my personal opinion, and go for the greater good.
I can agree with that. We touched base on youth protection as far as that would go. Just had a few more on here. If we could touch on local I struggle with words. Autonomy. What level of control will local governments have over cannabis businesses within their jurisdictions? Is it going to be a little more split up like it is now? And how will this balance with state regulations, if in your eyes?
So in Wisconsin, we know we have 72 counties. So we recognize the importance of local control, first of all. But our regulatory framework basically would respect the local autonomy while also making sure that we enforce statewide standards, because we have to have that in place to make sure for health, safety, and equitable access. So basically, local governments will have the authority to impose zoning and regulation restrictions on cannabis businesses, such as controlling where the dispensaries can go, where they're located, and setting limits on the number of licenses that are issued in jurisdictions. So this model would be similar to how alcohol regulations and stuff are regulated and managed. But in states like California, Colorado, those municipalities, they have the option to opt out, allowing cannabis businesses altogether. So the states would pretty much establish baselines for health and safety, while the local municipalities would determine the zoning aspects and regulations of the businesses.
Okay. Nope, I got you. As far as veteran access, are there any specific provisions being considered to ensure that veterans have access to cannabis for treatment of conditions like PTSD?
So I definitely support including PTSD as an eligible condition for cannabis treatment. I will say that, but we do know that my colleagues in this building, when they talk about medical marijuana, that has not been part of the discussion in terms of medical marijuana and legalization.
Okay. No worries. We'll just put that down as something that we want to make sure we try to keep on the table once we get things rolling. It's got to be frustrating to when you got something that, or like I've talked to just a few people that are like, oh, why don't you get involved in politics and stuff? And like my biggest thing is when it comes to something like legalization, that to me it's just like I try to like see both sides, right? But it's so one sided. Even when you look at like the support numbers, that it's just so hard for me to like kudos to you for being able to keep a cool head and like
Oh, I
at
don't
least
always
walk
keep
in.
a cool head.
Well, at all. Like I don't know. I get hung up on stuff. Like it. I just when I walk through those hallways, I just sometimes I want to knock on a couple people's doors and be like, "What are you doing in here? Like,
But
what
you
is?"
know, we don't in this building, we don't always listen. Let's
Sure.
just put it like this: in the majority of the cases, we don't always listen because marijuana isn't legalized now, right? But we
Mhm.
have individuals who come in who, own CBD stores. And they sell Delta 9 products, and they come in, and we've had hearings where they say we need more, we need more regulation because that puts us at a disadvantage. It puts our customers at a disadvantage. And we haven't done it. I mean, very seldomly do you hear people ask to be regulated, but you are hearing them ask to be regulated.
Yeah.
And we haven't done it. And it's like, that's an issue. That's an issue. It's an issue not only for the consumer, it's an issue for those individuals who are trying to run reputable businesses. It's an issue for the banks because a lot of these individuals, they can't find banks to take their money. Now, I would like to have that problem. I would like to have so much money
Yeah.
that I
Right.
can't find a bank to accept my money. Mine
Sure.
is the opposite. I don't have enough money to put in multiple banks. But they're coming in and they're asking us they're asking us for help, and we're not doing it. But yet we want to blame the industry and say, oh, well, marijuana isn't a profession, or this isn't an industry that can be trusted, and you wonder why, because you're not trying to make it a reputable business, right? You're
Right.
not trying to make it a safe business. And I will never understand that, you know.
It seems like every aspect of cannabis is like I can't remember the last time at any level that or state or federal or where it was something with cannabis was just like an easy like a oh yeah, this is how it's going to be. It seems like every single part along the way of this industry has just been crazy, like just
Mhm.
sometimes even mind-boggling, and it really is. And I could be wrong, but I still think part of it comes down to I feel like they as in like the federal government or just the establishment itself. I feel like has probably hurt so many people's lives, like millions, that it's got to be a little hard to be like, hey, we were wrong, let's fix all this. But at the same time, you keep dragging it out, it's only worse. Like it's unfortunate that we are where we are, but hopefully through
we we
consistency.
don't take enough time to educate ourselves in this building, but yet we will, in most cases, and I probably shouldn't be saying this in public, but I'm gonna say this anyway because this is the honest to God truth. We pass bills in this building every single day without understanding the outcome of what we're doing, and that's for real. We will sit here and we will pass bills and we will not know a damn thing about the bills that we're passing. Now, I'm saying we as a courtesy because I'm a part of this building too,
Sure.
but I ain't talking about me because you need to take the time to try and research and find out what the repercussions are of what it is that you're passing. I see in these hearings all the time that people will bring up these grandiose ideas, and you will be in those hearings and you will ask two or three questions that will just break down the entire bill, right? And it's like you didn't think about that. You didn't think about how this was going to affect that. You didn't go as to far as to ask these two or three questions. Oh, well, that doesn't matter. We'll fix it. Or it's like, no, you can't pass something that's broken and then expect somebody to allow this to pass and then say we'll amend it or we'll fix it later. No, you get it right in the beginning. We see that all the time. Or not being concerned about those adverse effects. We see that all the time in this building, and people generally don't care. We see it all the time. And for example, there was a hearing that I sat in, and they wanted to change childcare regulations. They wanted to change the number of children that could be cared for by one provider, right? They wanted to increase the number. No scientific data behind it. Just some people thought, okay, well, it's legal for one person to take care of, 8 children now. We'll just throw in an extra three. These are somebody's kids. That those extra three without the scientific data could mean you could put all other 8 of these kids at risk. Because really, who thought about this? Who thought about this? I mean, and that's every single day, every single day.
That's got to be. I feel like if I was in a role such as yours, I would really be a cannabis consumer.
I tell everybody, when I first got to this building, I felt insecure because I thought to myself, oh my God, what did I do? I shouldn't be here because, some people had law degrees. It was just a really intimidating building until I got here and I got to know some of these people. And I was like, well, how the hell did they get here? Because then you
Sure.
start to realize some of these people really ain't that smart.
Sure. Just
So
doing what they're told type thing. So, well, I'm glad Milwaukee has some representation and has a very good head on their shoulders, and appreciate your fighting the good fights in many cases for the people that vote for you and taking the time to listen to your constituents. I think that's something that unfortunately doesn't happen enough anymore. So, appreciate your time with us. I think we kind of hit on everything that we had come up with. So, again, just super appreciative of you, Senator Johnson, what you're doing for the people of Wisconsin, and I hope we can help push things on our end to get this thing to happen, because it helps so many people, and I think it really will help get rid of some of the negative connotations that are the cannabis, like clean up the streets, that kind of stuff too. So, appreciate your time very much. I'm sure you got a lot of other fun things to do today, so we'll let you get back to that. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the people of Wisconsin with before we let you go?
I just want to say thank you for your advocacy, and just keep up the work, because the one thing that I have learned in this building is that things may not get done the first session or the second session or the third session. Persistence is the key. And it's persistence all different type of ways. Sometimes it takes you showing up at the building and advocating. Sometimes it takes writing letters. It takes postcards. It takes phone calls. The one thing that I know about certain issues like legalization is that you have people in every single county that believes in this issue, right? And that is constituents that are both Democrat and Republicans. And you have to have all of those individuals push. In this building, we have a system called Forward. That means if you send a letter, if you write, if you make a phone call, that information is supposed to go into a database, right? So when there's a hearing on a particular bill, sometimes the question is asked, well, how many people have you had contact your office about this issue? I haven't had any. So if I've had 300 people contact my office, then that information should be documented in Forward. I've had 300 letters, I've had 300 phone calls. Never underestimate the power of sending an email, the power of sending postcards. It takes that type of advocacy for real to get this done. Not just one session, but every single session. You have to let your voice be heard. And in situations where you feel like your voice isn't being heard, sometimes it takes running for office to let people know that you're serious. And in most cases, that's exactly what it does. It takes disruption of the system in order for people to understand that there are other people out there that will step up to the plate and will get the job done.
That's awesome. That's good. Appreciate those tidbits. We'll make sure we get that out to the people and really hit home how important that stuff is. That's neat. I'm glad to hear that they have something like that, because that just kind of solidifies the fact that it is doing the right thing, taking the time to do that. I know sometimes it can feel tedious, but to me, that's a really good idea that it would be going to a database and everything too. So, all right. Well, I appreciate that insight as well. Thank you again for your time, Senator Johnson. We'll let you get back to it. And thank you, everyone, for stopping out on the show tonight. And hope everyone has a great day. We'll catch you guys later.
Thank you.